right. Next, it's my great pleasure to introduce Georgi Latai. He's the co-founder and MD of Lynx Analytics. Now, Georgi, we're very proud of you. He's an INSEAD alumni, so that's terrific to see. Lynx was actually born here at INSEAD, I think, in 2010. And for those of you alumni in the crowd, it really goes to show, MBA, our alumni, you can really get involved pretty easily in AI. It's a graph theory startup. I don't think you had a background in graph theory before, so really goes to show you can make that transition in a big way. So, Lynx is really quite an amazing company. I really encourage you all to check it out. Lynx grew to about $66 million worth of analytic technology and solution platform revenue, and they're selling to global companies in 3 different continents, so really a case we're proud of. So congratulations, Georgi. So welcome back to INSEAD. The floor is yours.
Can I get the...
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, just a slight correction is the value of the company, not the revenue, but this is fine. So yes, what I was also asked to, how many people are MBAs, by the way, in this crowd? Okay, great. So yeah, so one of my presentation is really just explaining the story and then how did it all come together at INSEAD, but we will also try to touch some of the AI aspects of it. And so this is like a timeline. So it all started actually with Phil Parker having some course in telecommunication strategy and marketing with one of the other co-founder, Miklos Sarvari, and then all kinds of companies came in and like AI was called statistics maybe. And at that time already though, there were like huge data sets and like the computing technology was not that ready for it. So typically you would have to do for anything above 4 gigabytes of memory to pay Oracle $200,000 to even start doing anything on the real big data. So that's why part of the sort of activities were around consulting on this type of data sets, but the other was to start developing some kind of analytics technology which can analyze large and massive graphs. And then how I got into this, I was here in MBA in 2007, so it was not immediately at that time that we teamed up, but then I went to Silicon Valley, then the economy crashed, then did some freelancing, then even had INSEAD to do some CRM systems, but in the meantime, this idea was like going around, and then at some point with some of the PhDs and professors, we just decided to set up a company because there was so much incoming requests. So maybe one advice is that hang out with the PhDs, professors at INSEAD, because a lot of them are super entrepreneurial. Even today, we are doing lots of stuff. And there are really these things like, I'm sure even Phil, if he was really wanting to leave INSEAD, probably could become a multi-billionaire with his technology, but he loves teaching more. So anyways, I think there's good ways to do these team-ups. And I think later on, we actually got some investment. We were not really looking for it. It was more like one of the clients liked the technology that we deployed there. Again, it was a telecom who had like billions of transactions on a day. They wanted to do all kinds of interesting things about it. And then even in Singapore, I think there's a big push for big data. So the government, even though we didn't get grants, but we did projects with IDA on analyzing all the telco data and location patterns and how they should redevelop the MRT system based on where people go and move. So I think there's a lot of things in Singapore, open data, data.gov.sg. So there's a lot of stuff that when you need data for an early stage of some kind of development, that you can do that. And then, yeah, I can see the time as well. So yeah, and then other than that, we got some awards, and then later on, we are venturing into all kinds of things, which I explain. And maybe just to touch on the previous presentation, yes, we really love when Google comes with something like DeepMind. Actually, DeepMind comes with AlphaGo because, again, this gives a lot of insights and inspiration for the industry. So just with also another INSEAD alum in Vodafone Germany, we are working on like a AlphaGo-inspired Monte Carlo tree search methodology where we just want to help them develop the fiber network across Germany, which they want to spend on 3 billion euros for the next few years. And it's literally comparing like the optimal routes between any endpoints to any other endpoints, the same way how you would like map a big table and then try to figure out what's the optimal strategy to win the Go game, and it's literally very similar type of algorithms. And if you look at a city or a country, it can be represented as a graph, as Philip also talked about graph theory. So just to give an insight, this was our presentation to the company who actually invested to us. So we really just wanted to sell that we are valuing fun. We are also valuing like academia. So funnily enough, a few years ago when you talked about academia again in a style, that's too academic, whatever. Today, the guy at Berkeley, who is the adjunct professor and CEO of Databricks, just raised $270 million on a valuation of $3 billion, and because the open source story is really linked to academia, and suddenly everyone realized that if you want to solve really hard problems, you really need to work with academia. So I think that, again, is kind of a new paradigm in this whole AI research. And yeah, we are trying to do hackathons here in Singapore, everywhere. We are really connected to the industry and then academia, and then somehow we are trying to mix this together. And in terms of just to talk about this graph theory a bit further, so what does it mean also from business context? There is a lot of networks, and most of the analysts still today, if you were observing any business analyst or even data scientist, I think 80% of the time he would work with relational data, like rows and columns, like in Excel. But there is a lot of huge emerging fields of very complex systems where also the algorithms are somewhat different. So of course, Watson is one representation where you literally load up a text corpus and you sparse it and you do lookup, but there can be any kinds of other things in terms of complex communication networks, how the information spreads, trade networks, payment, blockchain, cryptocurrency, terrorist networks, energy networks, transportation networks. So these are large, complex systems. And okay, this is a bit text heavy, but from our company perspective, we see that the relational databases are a bit losing ground, and then graph databases are emerging in a way, and then obviously the algorithms and the AI on top of graphs are also. So one is, of course, telecom and social networks, which was part of the previous presentation, but again, even the human brain is literally like 100 billion neurons connected via 1 trillion edges, and there's a lot of research is going into like how they fire, in which topologies they try to sort of like pass on information. So there's a lot of different things, and in some cases there can be very quick results with some graph theory approach that are well known, and then in some cases it will be a lot of research. I think this is a bit of representation of what is it really when you try to stretch it from a research perspective. So of course everyone says that anything is AI is only from past data. I think this is also starting to change a little bit. So there's a bunch of research that is even trying to figure out what you are doing when you're dreaming, for example, at the late stage of your dream, and then learn from that. And then like they say, from 10 years now, like literally some of the algorithms are going to recommend you actions based on your dreams, which are somewhat unconscious. But it's very true. So basically, when you look at a complex graph, so something which our R&D team is doing, who are, of course, all ex-Google, and they also worked with some of the Google knowledge graph and semantic problems, is what does happen when these sort of network neighbors are trying to talk to each other. So you have a neural network on each, but it's not just like learning from the big patterns on segment level, but literally is asking around your neighbor, how are you today? Or like, what have you experienced? Is your experience relevant to me? And then this is propagated across like hundreds of millions of nodes. So again, I'm pretty sure Facebook does a lot of that. That's why they can change an election if they want. But also there's a lot of things that happening in other domains where even for transportation optimization, previously constraints-based optimization, maybe like resolving like local congestion issues, there's a lot of things that can happen in this. And then there's a good application area. And I think it's really good to have always a part of your team working on these very, very inspiring things, because then it gives away the everyday headaches. And then, for example, one of the futuristic applications, so this is the dream of our CTO, is that, for example, already you have Siri and everything in your pocket, but in the future, these things are going to protect you, not just from spam, but from everything. So you go in a store, you see some big promotion, you suddenly want to buy something, but then your AI is, no, you don't need this. Like, I know you better. And then like it starts to negotiate with the neighboring stores that like what you really want, and like don't push this spam on you because this is what I need. But by the way, if you have that, then I'm happy to buy. So there's a lot of sort of research, but one thing is that this sort of what we call communicating AI, because then again, it also means potentially creating things as opposed to just learning from past data. So and then you can try to emulate that, okay, even if it's not in any data set yet, but they figure out something from past data which is new, then this not will be necessarily hold anymore true, that like you can only do things from reading existing data sets. But until this comes, let's go back to everyday life. So I also wanted to give just like a bit of insight of, okay, when you work with organizations, you want to help them in big data, what does it mean, and how ready they are or how they are not, and what do they buy and what not. So with all these AI, of course, we create, for example, household views. The graphs are very important. You will have 1 trillion devices soon. Today, a Hong Kong household has 24 devices on a network. Even if you just want to figure out customer experience for any type of application, you really need to know who has that device. Is it the son, the father, the whatever? Is it at least the same person? So when you build a model on it, it's very important that your unit of analysis, your core ID, is, for example, the same. But how you represent it is that, for example, one of the dream of CEOs is called happiness index. Is actually Bain invented NPS already like 15 years ago, but it's survey-based. Now they want to do this on a big database. They want to know on a real-time basis that if I called you up for an NPS right now, within 5 minutes, I want 80% accuracy whether you would respond as a promoter or as a detractor, and especially in very contested industries where mature are, and then there's like a lot of things are not net new growth, but retention and just making sure you're happy with what you have. This project is something that seems to be quite appealing, and then we develop this on the top of graph theory, but also on the top of like neural networks trying to figure out what's happening with you right now. So this is the CEO of Hong Kong Telecom, and then he literally says, for example, that they just replace their sort of churn medal, which is every retail bank, every airline, every telco would have, into something like a happiness index, which is like 60 indicators telling you where you are in your journey, how happy you are about it. But of course, even if it sounds very nice, what really happens, even if you have a buy-in, then most likely you will start your projects just literally getting data in order, because no matter what we say, I mean, 80% of organizations really don't have a structured data lake, but even not an unstructured one. So like, things are all over the place. And I think that will be the reality for the next 15 years. Even Databricks said, coming out of Berkeley, that all of their revenue is literally, or most of it is just like data engineering. So I think you have to be prepared for that, that while all this hype is there, I think a lot of things is literally getting placed in order and then put on very exciting AI. And then, for example, you can say any organization, I would just classify them like, in a way, this from my perspective, and you have to sell to them, or when you have to convince them on the AI vision. So obviously, you will always have some visionaries and recommenders, but at the end of the day, you have saboteurs, people who don't want this, they like what it is today, they really don't want more computers, they don't want any automation. So you really have to struggle your way and convince the right people that they really need something for the everyday job. You really have to map out the process they are involved in and like make sure that like with this thing, you are gonna have less work, because they don't care necessarily about how much money for the overall company it makes. I mean, very few companies are super organized in a way that at every layer, everyone is super tied to their revenue. So you really have to figure out how AI makes things simple for everybody in the organization, not just someone who wants to buy it. And then also, this is our segmentation for, I think being a visionary on the C-level is a dangerous thing. So the median year, if I really classify our customer base and who are the ones who really want to stretch AI and then try new things, I mean, those are the ones who typically don't stay too long in the organization if they want to disturb a lot of the status quo. So then again, I think it's really the mid-layer who have to use this on an everyday basis. And I think it's very important to get them on board. So get the buy-in on the top. I mean, really go and run with it until they stay. But because many AI projects not always get you billions, but sometimes it's not going to be changing the world. Still, it's very important for the future. I think one idea is definitely try to involve all layers. And I think for good, for the people and everybody, but you have this emergence of the, previously had the emergence of the chief data officer, now you have the chief data protection officer. So I think it also means that whatever you could do 2 years ago very quickly with AI, I think now there's a setback for the next 3 years, and like it's probably good for some purposes, but you see the difference between, for example, Chinese lack of regulation versus Europe full regulation. It really will mean that those guys are gonna like be way faster because just they have access to all the data, which sometimes Europe will not. So again, if you set up a company and you work with INSEAD guys and you're in Singapore, just make sure you have some projects in China as well. And then you make sure that like you have some data set access that you can really experiment with. So the other things that I think is really helpful, and I think this is going to keep coming, is when, for example, big companies announce big acquisitions, and then all the managers in every company realize, wow, like this is really important. So, for example, Qualtrics did nothing else but like survey. I think a lot of schools use them even for surveying the students of do they like what they like. And then it's also used for NPS. And then no one would expect it, but SAP paid $8 billion for Qualtrics last December because one of the big ideas is to how to combine this ongoing feed from the humans and then try to predict that feed through operational data. So for example, similar to our happiness index trying to predict NPS, they say 77% of the world's transaction is run on SAP-related systems, 1.5 or 1.8 billion experience touch points run on Qualtrics. Let's use that Qualtrics feeding data to train the models and like figure out the best way how the operational data feeds from all systems are going to predict. So I think, again, you can use these examples because then people on top realize that, wow, yeah, if you don't do this, like we are going to lag behind and everyone, including our competitors or somehow 1.8 billion experience touch points are getting ahead with a prediction. If I don't use prediction, I'm going to just lagging behind. And of course, just a very, very crowded space, even in customer experience AI. So there's a lot more acquisitions to come, a lot more things to do. One conclusion also, if you have a platform view, you want a big graph and predicting AI, then you really have to build some integrations to the rest of the ecosystem. And all these APIs and microservices and little API over the other API, I think it's going to come. And I think soon banks, telcos, or any big systems just become some IT company, and they're going to just be very quickly developing these very combined APIs. So the payment gateway asks for some credit scoring, it gives the recommendation, goes to the store. So this WeChat type of sort of microservices, I think, going to spread a lot. I mean, previously, we called it APIs. And I think from a data perspective, this is how at least we see that, like from the left, you see the ones where there's going to be a huge explosion of further data because when you have more data, then you have more analysis. And then I really think, based on also the presentation, what we see about the elderly, like healthcare and related IoT in magnitude, probably that's going to grow the most in terms of available data. And for all the elderly, it really needs real-time streaming. By the way, I'm pretty happy about this because if you look at ourselves as INSEAD or any international people, even if we had 4 children, I'm pretty sure we would be not close to them. So previously, people would still get old, but like there was not this big focus on this. But now that there's a proportion of old is much bigger, I think our aged life will be way better because all these solutions are coming in there and they're going to create amazing things. And then maybe the other things that's going to explode a lot is like payments, e-commerce, blockchain. So I'm not sure if some of you heard about it, but Google started to index blockchain data the same way how they started to index the internet previously, because there are so many, I think 77% of banks already have some blockchain infrastructure, for example, set up in their systems. And if Facebook adopts a stablecoin currency across their billions of users, then suddenly everyone will just rush to do very similar things, because if Facebook does it, then we have to do it too. So I think on this payment and e-commerce type of data, there's going to be a huge explosion if you're thinking what to do. But of course, the application has to make sense. And in terms of what is it for Lynx, so we just really hope that this what I think the SoftBank's founder Masayoshi Son called the Cambrian explosion of data or devices. So I think even if just 1/4 is true of what he's saying, of why they bought ARM for chips and putting out all those sensors that are going to be talking, and there's going to be more robots on Earth that are serving humans, according to him, by 2035 than actual humans. I mean, don't think it's going to be that fast, but definitely, even if, again, just a small portion is true, then there's a lot of connected data there. All these network type of views are going to be very, very important, not just the relational type of view. And like, you will have to make systemic level of insights and recommendations. And again, if you look into, let's say you have your own startup and you are looking into how VCs or the world are valuing them, here are just 4 examples. So our sort of intuition anyways, by the way, is just like you have to spread out your technology. And that's why a lot of open source projects also happening or happened. And even just Google announced that the way how they want to compete with Amazon is to enable open source and enable a billing infrastructure for open source. But you see that Fractal, they all do consulting, revenue hundreds, valuation 200s, but still there is like huge amounts of money. But you have Neo4j, for example. It's an open source graph database. Their revenue is probably $8 million. They raised 80 million, estimated valuation 300-400. We really don't drive ever the company based on valuations, so that's the worst thing I think anyone can do. But in terms of just what the VCs and investors are thinking, I think the intuition tells that literally you have to spread out your technology because companies are not knowing yet what to pay for, what not to pay for. So the very best you can do to be integrate to their ecosystem, to their data ecosystem. And because data is so hard and managing it is even harder, once you are in, it's very hard to remove anyone. And like people who finally understand someone else's data or the system is moving and there, you are automatically getting into that ecosystem. So maybe that's another advice. And in terms of what's next for us, and then obviously we always get MBAs from last batch as well. Just talked to yesterday someone from the current MBAs. But basically, we have 3 core projects, whether it all stays in the same company or not, that we don't know yet. But like, obviously, we are going to continue with this customer experience story. It seems to be really nice. People want AI to solve solutions as opposed to just like the technology. But we have this amazing technology that is still in competition on run times and speed and scale of graph computation with the very largest like player, which is Neo4j. So we might also just open source this technology and just give it out. So by the way, if you are interested or you really do analyze some big data, we are collecting early users and trials. So if someone can just like send the emails, then we might send out a license. We will definitely give to Phil and everyone at the INSEAD faculty. But that's something that could be a quite interesting project. And then, of course, once you have an open source technology stack, then you can team up with any domain experts who want to use it for a specific purpose. So there was a team, we together with them achieved #2 in like the world's biggest cryptocurrency exchange, Blockchain Hackathon. We were not really experts in blockchain or crypto at that time. We were just like looking at it as a graph analytics challenge, scoring people, figure out which transactions are scams or fake. But it had a really good use case, so now we might work with the Monetary Authority of Singapore also to help establish the regulatory framework to make sure it's safe and people can use all types of blockchain transactions. And I think literally that's the end of my slides. Yes? That's over.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fascinating application of cutting-edge AI and analytics to the customer experience, right? And seeing that work. So why don't we take a few questions? I know customer experience and analytics are something that's the top of everyone's mind. So let's dive in. Any questions?
Yes.
Thank you, Gorgi, for a very nice, interesting presentation. So I've been hearing a lot about AI from Professor Phil and everybody today, and it has been great. Professor Phil mentioned that the entry barriers to AI-based industries are getting lowered quite a lot.
So
and the entry barriers to AI-based industries are getting lowered quite a lot. And you mentioned that there are a plethora of players in this industry as you speak. So what is your key challenge today in order to survive and grow?
Yeah, I think the very early stage was obviously customers, right? So you have to get one. But I think other than that, it's really just communicating in between differentiation and the domain-specific solution. So if you really look at companies who are very, very successful, other than the big four, of course, in AI, they're not really AI companies. They're really finding a very specific domain, like, for example, this customer experience or whatever, because frankly, I don't think yet companies really evaluating yet on how this AI works and what's the thing that they can get out of it. So I think my advice is really find a very specific application and then focus down on that, decrease the number of data points that you need, have what we call a productized POC approach that you can go in, 8 data points is the same everywhere, ship it to 100 different customers who have the same few set of data. So that's one. But I think one of the danger of that I've seen it many times on big enterprises around our competitors, that you have a fad and then the guys just go down. So like right now they are amazing because they found a very niche application and they ship it everywhere. So either they get bought very quickly. I mean, if that's your purpose, great. But then it's very hard to then move it to the next application. And I think one thing that, again, I would advise that always have a small team, no matter how small it is, that is just not involved in anything around client delivery. Make sure that like they just do whatever, like they're smoking whatever they want, and they're just working on the application. And then that, I think, is very important. Otherwise, the other part really have to just ship whatever is the focus solution. And I think that's how you get a niche, because then customers start talking about you, but it always have to be the same, and you have to repeat it for 3-4 years, the same proposition. Yeah. That's what I would say.
Spoken like a true entrepreneur. You got to focus. One over here.
Hi. I'm actually surprised that the previous speaker and in your not the previous, the health care startup, and in your deck as well, you can see a lot of mentioning of blockchain, and usually it's like a taboo word.
Yeah.
And people either put the fundraising and we work with the government and corporates, or we do blockchain stuff and we're like hackers, whatever. So what's your prediction with these companies like Google and Facebook going into blockchain space and cooperation in the future with the enterprise and the government?
Yeah, so by the way, blockchain is a very good technology for something, and it's not a good technology for many things. I think I fully agree. Like when I see a loyalty program on blockchain, then I'm not really happy. But at the end of the day, like, it's the same with distributed computing as well. So Hadoop, when we started and we needed an open source toolkit for, just making sure we can do something without paying Oracle, was also in many ways a technology for some big data, but because the hype was there, everyone used Hadoop for everything. So I just see the same thing with blockchain. So I can't be negative about those people. Like they are just riding the wave in a way. But I really think that it's going to be there. So whether it's useful for some things or not, I think it's really useful for anything where you need a trust in the system and you have this distributed ledger when everyone can verify that no one is changing the system. If you asked about advanced democracies, do you really need that? Do you really think that the government and the banks are changing the data so everyone else in the system have to agree about this? Then some people would say, yes, we can't trust the system, therefore blockchain is needed for everything. And then some people would say that, yes, it's needed. So my view is if Facebook, for example, adopts stablecoin, whether it's blockchain or not, probably they might not use the same protocol for blockchain because it would be very slow. But I think it will be just exploding. So whether it's useful or not, I think every enterprise, every IT team is preparing to have blockchain as one of the technology stack in their thing, and it's going to stay for 10 years. So I think, yeah, I mean, if you want to raise funds on it, you can do it. I mean, right now we are not raising funds on this necessarily within Lynx Analytics, but some teams who use our technology to analyze blockchain, they do raise. And I think, again, from a regulator perspective, we are talking to the SEC in the US. How do they regulate this? MAS in Singapore. So I think it's just going to be part of the ecosystem. So yeah, you have to learn it. So everyone needs to know how does it work, what's its weaknesses and strengths. So yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting to see the different history of AI and blockchain. AI, as Phil told us, really has a 30-plus year history, depending on how you look at it, whereas blockchain is much more new, right? But it is fascinating to see even central banks become interested. I work a lot with Bank Indonesia, and they have projects thinking about building up some sort of crypto assets, and I know US Fed is doing the same and others. So we'll see if they actually go forward with implementation.
No. There is a full compliance framework going live in 2020 in, I think, most of the 10 biggest economies.
In Singapore, yeah.
No, and in Singapore, in Japan, in the US, everywhere. So again, to me, it's perfect, by the way, because we are analyzing graphs. I mean, blockchain is a graph. It has wallets, transactions, smart contracts. So if explosion happens in blockchain data, we are very happy because we are analyzing it, but we are not driving the blockchain application itself. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much, Georgie. That's fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah.